Betrayal doesn't always start with lies. Sometimes, it starts with a feeling. A small, creeping sensation that something isn't right, something is off. Olivia didn't notice it at first. She was too busy hiding things from me, too busy smiling at messages she shouldn't be receiving, too busy whispering on calls she thought I didn't hear. She was too wrapped up in her own secret world to realize I had already discovered it. And instead of calling her out, instead of confronting her like some desperate fool begging for an explanation, I decided on something better. I decided to make her afraid. It started small. A tap on the window when she was home alone. A car parked just a little too long outside our house. The sound of footsteps when she was showering. A shadow moving just out of sight in the corner of her vision. She started looking over her shoulder. She started locking doors she never used to. She started waking up at night, glancing toward the bedroom door, listening. I watched as it settled into her, a slow-growing paranoia, something she couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. At first, she shook it off, laughed at herself, told me she was being ridiculous. But fear doesn't go away when you laugh at it. It lingers. It festers. I made sure to feed it. I left the back door unlocked when I left for work, just enough for her to notice when she got home. I set her phone to vibrate and sent her anonymous messages from a number that didn't exist, just the kind of cryptic nonsense that meant nothing, but sounded like it did. I see you. Nice dress today. Are you alone? She started deleting them immediately, started pressing the lock button on her phone twice as often, started sitting up in bed at night, staring at the screen, waiting. She didn't tell me at first. She didn't want to sound crazy. She thought maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she had forgotten to lock the door. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. But then she found the note. It was simple. Just a single sheet of paper left on the kitchen counter. Does he know? I made sure to come home late that night. I wanted to see what it would do to her. And sure enough, the moment I stepped through the door, she was there, standing in the hallway, arms crossed over her stomach, lip caught between her teeth. She tried to act normal, but her eyes gave her away. She was scared. Hey, I greeted, setting my keys down, pretending I didn't notice the way she tensed at the sound. You okay? She hesitated, a fraction too long, then forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Liar. I let her keep her secret, let her sit with it, let her pretend she was still in control. But I could see it in the way she hesitated before heading to bed, in the way she double-checked the locks, in the way she laid down facing the bedroom door like she was waiting for something, or someone, to walk through it. And when she finally drifted off to sleep, I left another note. This time, I slipped it under her pillow. Just 4 words. You should be careful. She wouldn't see it until morning. Wouldn't understand how it got there, how someone could have gotten so close without her waking up. Wouldn't know who to turn to, who to tell, who to trust. And that was exactly what I wanted. She had betrayed me. Now, it was time for me to break her. Olivia woke up with a scream lodged in her throat. She sat up so fast that the blankets tangled around her legs, her chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths as her fingers clutched the paper that had been slipped under her pillow. You should be careful. Her hands were shaking. I watched from the doorway, pretending to be groggy, rubbing at my eyes like I had just woken up. Babe, what's wrong? She flinched, turning to me like she had forgotten I was even in the room, like she had convinced herself she had been alone, like whatever was happening to her was only happening to her. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the paper before she quickly crumpled it in her fist. Nothing, she whispered, voice hoarse, dry. Just a bad dream. I stepped closer, making sure to keep my movements slow, gentle, concerned. You sure? You look pale. She nodded quickly, too quickly. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. I could see it in the way her fingers curled around the blankets, in the way she kept glancing at the nightstand, at the place where she had found the note, at the pillow she had lifted only to find something she couldn't explain. She was terrified, and she was trying to hide it from me. I let it sit, let the silence weigh her down, let her mind turn against her. She didn't eat breakfast, didn't say much. She just kept looking at her phone, at the messages she thought were private, at the things she had done, at the affair she had been so careful to keep hidden. I could see the panic in her face, the doubt creeping in, the realization that she might not have been as careful as she thought, that someone else might know, that someone else might be watching. She barely noticed when I kissed her on the cheek, barely responded when I told her I had to run a few errands, barely even looked at me as I walked out the door. And that was fine, because I wasn't really leaving. I watched her from the street, waiting, waiting, and then, there it was. She locked the doors, checked the windows, walked from room to room, double-checking, triple-checking, convincing herself that she was alone. But she didn't feel alone. I had made sure of that. She grabbed her phone, hesitated, then typed something out. I knew exactly who she was texting. Him. I waited 5 minutes. Then I sent another message. I know what you've done. I watched as she jumped, as she gasped, as her fingers trembled over the screen. She stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee, muttering a curse, barely noticing the spill as she ran to the window, peering out like she expected someone to be standing there, staring back at her. She didn't see me. She would never see me. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she felt me. She started pacing, back and forth, back and forth. Then, finally, she grabbed her keys. She didn't even clean up the mess she had made. She just bolted out the door, got into her car, and drove. I already knew where she was going. I followed her, kept a distance, watched as she pulled into a parking lot, as she sat in the driver's seat with her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't just scared. She was panicking. She was unraveling. And then he showed up. The man she had thrown everything away for. The man she had risked our marriage for. The man she thought was worth betraying me. He leaned into the driver's side window, brows furrowed, concerned, his hand brushing against hers as she whispered something, as she showed him her phone, as she turned to look over her shoulder like she could feel someone watching. She could. She just didn't know it was her husband. I waited. Let them talk. Let her explain. Let her tell him about the notes, the texts, the paranoia clawing its way into her mind. I watched as he shook his head, as he reached out to comfort her, as he pulled her into an embrace that wasn't his to give. And then I smiled. Because this was exactly what I wanted. She didn't even realize she was digging her own grave. I took my phone out and sent one last message. You can't run from me. Her body jerked when the notification popped up. She spun around so fast she nearly tripped, eyes wide, scanning the parking lot, searching. But there was no one there. No one she could see. No one she could blame. She pressed a hand over her mouth, shaking her head, muttering something to him that I couldn't hear. He grabbed her by the shoulders, whispered something back, and then, just like that, she threw herself into his arms, seeking comfort, seeking safety, seeking protection from a threat that wasn't even real. I leaned back in my seat, satisfied. She wasn't afraid of getting caught anymore. She was afraid for her life. And this was just the beginning. Olivia was unraveling, and I was watching it happen in real time. She clung to him in the parking lot, breathing heavily, shaking her head, whispering frantic words I couldn't hear but already knew. She was scared. She felt watched. She felt hunted. And that was exactly how I wanted her to feel. I watched from a safe distance, unseen, unnoticed, while her so-called lover rubbed her back, whispering assurances, trying to calm her down. He didn't understand what was happening. He thought this was about them. He thought she was paranoid that I would find out. He had no idea that Olivia wasn't just afraid of getting caught. She was afraid for her life. She kept checking her phone, fingers shaking as she hovered over the screen. I knew she was reading my last message. You can't run from me. She probably wanted to text me, to ask me if I knew, to figure out if I was the one behind this. But she didn't. She wouldn't risk it. Not in front of him. Not when she was already spiraling. Instead, she said something else to him. Her voice hushed, her eyes darting around the parking lot, scanning for something, for someone. She couldn't see me, but I knew she could feel me. Then, she made her next mistake. She got in his car. I smiled, watching as they pulled out, following from a distance, keeping my headlights off, keeping just enough space between us that they wouldn't notice. She wasn't going home. I already knew that. She didn't feel safe there anymore. So where did she go? His place. I parked a few blocks away, close enough to see but far enough to disappear if I needed to. I watched as she stepped inside, as he locked the door behind her, as she thought she was finally safe. She wasn't. I waited an hour. Then I made my next move. A knock. Just one. Sharp. Quick. Loud enough to be heard. Quiet enough to be dismissed as a trick of the mind. I knew they were inside, probably in the living room, probably sitting on the couch, probably talking in hushed tones about what was happening to her, probably wondering if she was imagining things. I knew exactly how this would play out. She would freeze. She would stare at the door. She would wait. And when nothing happened, she would tell herself it was nothing. I knocked again. Harder this time. The reaction was immediate. The lights inside shifted. A shadow moved toward the door. I could picture her face, her wide eyes, her breath caught in her throat, her fingers gripping his arm as she whispered, "Did you hear that?" I stepped back into the darkness, blending into the night as the front porch light flicked on. I saw the blinds shift. They were looking, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the night swallowing them whole. Then her phone buzzed. My next message. "You're not safe there either." I watched her silhouette as she jerked back, stumbling. Her phone clutched so tightly in her hands that I thought she might shatter it. She turned to him, panic in her movements, shaking her head, losing herself. He grabbed her by the shoulders, tried to steady her, but it was useless. I had already infected her thoughts. I could imagine the way her voice shook as she whispered, "How do they know where I am?" She would look around the room now, question everything. Did she leave a trail? Was her phone tracked? Were the cameras outside hacked? She would tell herself this wasn't possible, that she had covered her tracks, that whoever was doing this shouldn't have been able to find her. But I did. She wasn't running from a person. She was running from a ghost. The lights in the house stayed on all night. Neither of them slept. I knew that because I didn't sleep either. I stayed in the darkness, watching, waiting, picturing every whispered conversation, every panicked thought, every racing heartbeat inside that house. She was breaking, and she had no idea that the man she was clinging to for safety, he wasn't the one who could save her. By morning, she looked like hell. Even from a distance, I could see the exhaustion, the way her body moved slower, the way she hesitated before stepping outside, scanning the street, searching for something that wasn't there. Her lover kissed her forehead, whispered something to her before she got into her car and drove away. I let her go, for now, because she could run as much as she wanted. She could hide. She could try to figure it out. But in the end, she would never escape me. Olivia drove like she was being chased. Her grip on the wheel was tight, her knuckles white, her shoulders tense as she kept glancing in the rearview mirror, scanning the road behind her, searching for something she couldn't name, someone she couldn't see. She didn't know where to go. She had already convinced herself she wasn't safe at home. She had tried running to him, but that hadn't worked either. She wasn't safe anywhere. That's what I wanted her to believe. That no matter where she went, no matter what she did, she was never alone. She had already started spiraling. I could see it in the way she moved, in the way she hesitated before unlocking the door to our house, in the way she stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, as if trying to convince herself it was okay to step inside. But the second she did, the second the door shut behind her, she felt it again. The wrongness. The weight of something she couldn't explain, something she couldn't shake, something that made her chest tighten and her breath come faster, something that made her heart pound. She locked the door, bolted it, stood there for a long time, staring at it, before finally turning on every light in the house. She was careful now, checking every room, making sure she was alone. She wasn't. Not really, because I was already inside her head. I was everywhere. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She just sat there, curled up on the couch, staring at her phone like it held the answers, like it could protect her, like it was the only thing tethering her to sanity. And then, finally, after what felt like hours, she grabbed it, took a shaky breath, and dialed his number. I let her. I let her hear the ringing, the silence stretching, her breath catching when he finally picked up. "Olivia?" His voice was groggy, tired. He hadn't slept either. "Good." "Hey," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I." She stopped, exhaling sharply. I don't know what to do. He sighed on the other end. Did you get another message? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the phone. No, but I feel like someone's watching me. There it was. The confession. The moment she admitted, out loud, that she was losing her grip. That she wasn't just afraid of being caught anymore. She was afraid of something worse. Something she couldn't control. I closed my eyes, listening to the way her voice trembled, picturing the way she must have looked, curled up on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, lower lip trembling, eyes darting toward the windows like she expected to see something. Asterisk, asterisk, someone. Asterisk, asterisk, standing there. But she wouldn't. Not yet. Do you want me to come over? He asked. The hesitation was there, just barely. He was getting tired of this, of her panic, of the way she clung to him now, not as a lover, but as a shield. She was no longer the confident, thrilling woman who had stepped into this affair with excitement and secrecy. She was a liability. He could feel it, and soon he would resent it. But for now, he still played the role of the hero. She swallowed. No, she murmured. I just needed to hear your voice. Disgusting. I almost wanted to laugh. She was falling apart, unraveling like a loose thread, desperate for reassurance, for comfort, for something real. But there was nothing real left in her life. She had traded reality for fantasy, traded security for lies, traded me for him. And now, she was losing everything. She hung up first. Probably didn't want to sound weak, didn't want him to hear the tears in her voice, didn't want to admit how badly this was breaking her. But I knew everything. And that's why I sent the next message. You should have run when you had the chance. I watched from the shadows as her entire body stiffened, as her breath caught in her throat, as she dropped her phone like it had burned her. She didn't pick it up right away, just stared at it, chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths, her hands curled into fists on the couch. She didn't move for a long time. And then, finally, she grabbed the phone and turned it off. Smart. But too late. She stood, pacing now, running her fingers through her hair, muttering something under her breath. Maybe telling herself she was imagining it. Maybe trying to convince herself it wasn't real. But the problem with fear? Once it's inside you, it doesn't go away. It grows. It festers. It turns even the safest places into something terrifying. And now, she wasn't safe anywhere. She locked herself in the bedroom that night, bolted the door, stacked a chair in front of it. But it didn't matter. She would still hear things. Still wake up in a panic, heart racing, pulse hammering, listening for sounds that weren't there, waiting for something to happen. And when she did, that's when I would make my next move. Olivia barely slept. I knew she wouldn't. She had barricaded herself in the bedroom, bolting the door, dragging a chair in front of it like that would stop something, someone, as if she wasn't already trapped inside the nightmare I had created for her, as if she could protect herself from something she couldn't even see. I imagined her lying there, heart pounding, breathing shallow, her fingers gripping the blanket as she stared at the shadows stretching across the ceiling, waiting for a sound, a movement, anything that would confirm what she already knew deep down. She wasn't alone. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I made sure she heard something. It wasn't much, just a faint sound, a whisper against the door, a barely audible breath, a presence. I could almost see her sitting up in bed, stiff, frozen, her pulse racing as she stared at the locked door, willing herself not to move, not to breathe too loudly, not to make a sound that might give her away. Like prey. Because that's what she was now. A cornered animal. And I wanted her to feel that way. She didn't open the door. She wouldn't dare. Instead, I heard the rustling of blankets, the quickened pace of her breathing, the sharp hitch when she reached for her phone, only to remember she had turned it off. She was alone, helpless, with nothing but her own fear clawing at her throat. Perfect. I stayed just long enough to let the paranoia settle deeper into her bones. Then, I walked away, quietly, slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting her wonder if she had imagined it. She didn't sleep after that. By morning, she was a wreck. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the counter, her coffee untouched, her eyes hollow and rimmed with dark circles. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was unraveling in front of me, and the best part? She didn't know it was me. Rough night? I asked casually, watching as she flinched at the sound of my voice. She swallowed hard, forcing a nod, fingers tightening around the coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. Liar. I stepped closer, just enough to make her shift uncomfortably, just enough to make her aware of how close I was. You seem tense, I murmured, watching as her jaw tightened, as her breath hitched just slightly. She didn't trust anyone anymore. Not even me. Yeah, she exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. Something wrong? I asked, pretending to be concerned, pretending like I had no idea what was happening to her. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, finally, she met my eyes. I think someone's following me. The words left her lips so softly, so full of uncertainty, that I almost smiled. Following you? I repeated, tilting my head slightly, pretending like the idea was ridiculous. Liv, what are you talking about? She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head, her fingers rubbing against her temples. I don't know. It's stupid. I keep hearing things, seeing things. And I got these messages, and I don't even know if... She stopped, swallowing hard. Like saying it out loud was making it more real. Like she didn't even trust herself anymore. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching as she fell apart in real time, as she tried to make sense of something that wasn't supposed to make sense. Maybe you're just stressed, I offered lightly. Work has been crazy lately, right? She laughed, short and bitter, her fingers gripping the counter now. This isn't stress, Michael. Good. She wasn't questioning whether something was wrong anymore. She was questioning herself. I set my mug down, sighing like I was struggling to understand, like I was trying to help. Look, if you're really scared, maybe you should go to the police. I saw it then, the flicker of doubt, the realization that if she went to the police, she would have nothing to show them. No proof, no evidence, nothing but her own paranoia, her own crumbling sanity. And if she told them about the messages, if she told them someone was watching her, they would ask why. And she couldn't answer that. Not without exposing everything. Not without exposing him. She was trapped. I let the silence stretch, let the moment settle, let her sit in the weight of her own helplessness before I finally sighed and shook my head. I'm sure it's nothing, I said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. You probably just need some rest. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the floor, her mind racing, her breath uneven. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make her shiver. I mean, it's not like someone's out to get you, right? Her eyes snapped to mine, wide, terrified. I smiled. She would never sleep again. Olivia was losing it. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she flinched at shadows, the way her breathing hitched when a floorboard creaked under her own weight. She didn't trust anything anymore, not her surroundings, not her own mind, and especially not me. She had spent the morning pacing the living room, checking the locks even though she had already checked them 5 times, staring out the window like she expected something, or someone, to be standing there. But no one was. That was the point. She was searching for a threat that didn't exist. Not in the way she thought, at least. The real threat was already inside. I let her sit in her paranoia, let her stew in the fear I had planted, let her heart pound in her chest every time her phone vibrated even though she had already silenced all notifications. She didn't even want to look at it anymore. Because every time she did, she saw the messages. Every time she did, she saw me. But she didn't know it was me. And that's why this was so perfect. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. She was running on nothing but fear now, pure adrenaline. Her nerves fried from the constant anticipation of something happening. And yet, nothing did. Not yet. She was waiting for the worst, waiting for that moment when she could finally prove to herself that she wasn't crazy, that this was real, that someone was actually out to get her. And I was going to give it to her. The first sound came at 2:37 a.m. A single, soft knock against the bedroom window. Just loud enough to wake her. just quiet enough to make her doubt whether she had really heard it. I stayed hidden, watching, waiting. I saw the moment her eyes flicked open in the darkness, the way she sucked in a sharp breath, frozen in place, staring at the window. She didn't move, didn't sit up. She just laid there, her pulse racing so loud I imagined she could hear it in her own ears. Then, slowly, her hand reached for her phone. She turned it on. No messages, no notifications, nothing, but she still felt it. She sat up then, hesitant, breath shaky as she turned toward the window. She didn't want to check. She didn't want to see. But she had to. She moved slowly, sliding out of bed, stepping carefully as if making a sound would draw attention to her. I stayed in the shadows, hidden, watching as she reached out and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Her exhale was sharp, almost relieved, but her hands were still shaking. She stood there for a long moment, staring out into the empty night, eyes darting back and forth as if she had expected something to be there, as if she had wanted it. Because if something was there, if there was a figure in the darkness, then it would mean she wasn't crazy. It would mean her fear was justified. But there was nothing, and that was worse. She turned away, rubbing her arms, muttering to herself as she climbed back into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin like that would keep her safe. And then, as she laid her head against the pillow, as she let out a slow, uneven breath, as she finally started to convince herself it was all in her head, I knocked again. Louder this time. Her breath caught. Her body stiffened. She knew she had heard it this time. She knew she wasn't imagining it. But she still didn't move, didn't turn, didn't breathe. She just laid there, trapped in her own body, trapped in the fear I had carefully placed inside her. I could feel it, the way her mind was racing, the way her entire world had shrunk down to this one moment, this one sound. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward the window. I saw it. The hesitation, the terror, the absolute certainty that something was on the other side of that glass, staring back at her. But she wouldn't check again. She couldn't. Instead, she pulled the blanket over her head, curled into herself, and forced her eyes shut. Like a child. Like she thought that if she couldn't see me, then I couldn't see her. I smiled. The next morning, she didn't speak. She moved like a ghost through the house, her eyes dull, her hands trembling as she poured herself a cup of coffee she never drank. She was exhausted, completely drained. She didn't even look at me when I sat down across from her, when I took a slow sip from my own mug, when I watched her over the rim with a knowing smile. Didn't sleep well? I asked, my voice soft, teasing, dripping with amusement she couldn't hear. She flinched. That was all the answer I needed. And I wasn't done with her yet. Olivia was at her breaking point. She moved like a woman who had already lost, shoulders hunched, movements slow, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. She didn't speak unless she had to, didn't look at me unless absolutely necessary, didn't reach for her phone anymore because she was too afraid of what she might see. She had tried ignoring it, tried telling herself it wasn't real, tried pretending this was just stress, just paranoia, just nothing. But now, she was too far gone. Now, she knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what, or who. That was what made this perfect. She didn't trust anyone anymore. Not even him. She hadn't gone to see him in 2 days. She hadn't called, hadn't texted. I could feel her pulling away, her mind spiraling, the paranoia infecting every inch of her life, every thought, every breath. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was doubt. What if she was being watched? What if someone knew? What if she had made a mistake? I made sure she questioned everything. I changed the positions of things in the house just slightly. A chair pulled out an inch further, a kitchen drawer left open, her perfume bottle knocked over in the bathroom. Small details. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But just enough to make her hesitate when she reached for it. Just enough to make her wonder. She didn't eat. Didn't sleep. She barely even spoke. And then I took it one step further. I waited until she went to bed. Waited until she locked the bedroom door behind her. Waited until the lights went out and the house fell into silence. Then, I moved. Slowly, carefully. I opened the bedroom door. She had locked it. I knew she had. I had watched her do it. Heard the sharp click as the deadbolt slid into place. But locks mean nothing when the person you fear the most is already inside. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just left the door open. She didn't wake up right away. It took time. The shift in the air, the slight creak of the wood, the cold breath of uncertainty curling around her as she slept. And then, slowly, I saw it. The moment her mind registered something was wrong. The moment her body stiffened. The moment her breath hitched and she forced her eyes open. She stared at the door. Wide open. She sat up too fast, panic jolting through her, hands gripping the blanket, chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven gasps. She knew she had locked it. She knew someone had been inside. But who? When? How? She didn't move at first. Didn't dare. Just sat there, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the doorway, her body tense, her mind racing, her pulse hammering in her throat. If she got up, she risked running into someone. If she stayed, she risked them coming back. She was trapped, completely trapped. And the best part? She had no idea I was watching. I stayed out of sight, listening to her shaky breathing, waiting for the moment she broke. It didn't take long. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking as she fumbled to turn it on, fingers trembling over the screen. And then she called him. He didn't answer at first. It was late, too late, but she tried again and again, until, finally, a groggy, confused voice filled the silence. Olivia? She inhaled sharply, closing her eyes, like hearing his voice was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I need you, she whispered. I smiled. I can't stay here, she continued, voice cracking. I can't. I don't feel safe. A pause. A heavy, weighted silence. Then, finally, his response. Do you want me to come get you? I already knew her answer. Please. She packed a bag in under 3 minutes, moving fast, her breath short, uneven, hands shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice. She didn't even turn the lights off when she ran out the door. She just left. I followed. She didn't see me. She was too busy checking the mirrors, too busy clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering her to reality, too busy believing she was finally escaping. But she wasn't. Not even close. She reached his apartment in record time. He was waiting for her at the door, brows furrowed, concern written across his face. Liv, what's going on? She didn't answer. She just stepped into his arms, exhaling shakily, like she had been holding her breath for days. Maybe she had. Maybe she thought this was over now. Maybe she thought she was safe. She wasn't. She never would be. Olivia thought she was safe. She stood in his apartment, wrapped in his arms, her breath slow and shaky, her body still trembling from the fear that had followed her all the way here. She didn't realize she had only brought it with her. She didn't know that I was already inside. I watched from the shadows as she pressed herself against him, as he whispered reassurances into her hair, as he told her over and over again that she was fine now, that nothing could happen to her here. That was a lie. He thought he was protecting her. He thought she had run to him because she trusted him, because he could make this all go away. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that she wasn't being hunted. She was being punished. She sat down on his couch, knees drawn to her chest, hands gripping the sleeves of her sweater like they were the only thing keeping her together. I don't know what's happening to me, she whispered, shaking her head. I swear I locked the door. I swear I heard something outside my window. I swear. She cut herself off, her throat working, her breathing uneven. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Good. He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face, exhaustion settling in. Liv, you're not crazy. But she was. She was exactly where I wanted her, questioning herself, doubting reality, searching for an answer that didn't exist. Maybe someone's messing with you, he continued, frowning. A neighbor? A coworker? It could be anyone. Her body tensed. And then, just like that, the thought slipped into her mind. Me. She had been so consumed with the idea that this was some faceless, nameless stranger, that someone out there had discovered her secret and was toying with her. But now? Now she had to ask herself the question she had been too afraid to face. Was it me? Did I know? Had I always known? She turned to him, lips parted, eyes wide with something like realization. Michael! A loud bang. She screamed. Her entire body jerked back, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the door. Someone was outside. She grabbed his arm, fingers digging into his skin, her nails pressing deep, hard enough to leave marks. "Did you hear that?" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood up, rubbing a hand over his jaw, moving toward the door. "It's probably nothing." It wasn't nothing. She knew that now. I watched as she shook her head, as she curled further into herself, as her entire body seemed to fold in on itself. "No," she whispered. "No, it's not nothing." He unlocked the door. She held her breath. He pulled it open. No one was there. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Liv, there's nothing here." But she wasn't looking at the empty hallway. She was looking down. A note, a single sheet of paper, folded in half, sitting just outside the door. Her hands were shaking as she reached for it, as she slowly bent down, as she picked it up with trembling fingers. She hesitated. Then she unfolded it. For words. "You can't run forever," she gasped, dropping it like it had burned her, stumbling back, her breath coming too fast, too shallow, her vision blurring at the edges. "Oh my God," she choked out, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh my God, oh my God." He grabbed the note, scanning it quickly, his brow furrowing. What the hell is this? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because she knew. She knew this wasn't just a prank. This wasn't just some sick joke. Someone knew. Someone was watching her. Someone was waiting. She was crying now, her shoulders shaking, her hands clutching at her hair as she rocked slightly, as she whispered, "This isn't happening." He crouched in front of her, gripping her arms. "Olivia, listen to me. We are going to figure this out." But she wasn't listening. She couldn't, because there was only one thought looping in her head. What if this never stops? What if this is her life now? What if she spends every day waiting, watching, running? What if there's nothing she can do to make it go away? She finally looked at him, eyes shining, lips trembling, a broken whisper escaping her lips. "Help me." But no one could. Olivia wasn't thinking clearly anymore. She wasn't even trying to convince herself it wasn't real. She sat on the couch, gripping the blanket around her shoulders like it could somehow protect her, like it could shield her from the thing she was running from. But she wasn't running. Not really. Because she didn't even know who she was running from. That was the beauty of it. She couldn't fight something she couldn't see. She couldn't defend herself against someone she didn't know existed. She had no name, no face, no target to blame. Just an overwhelming fear that wouldn't let her breathe. She was breaking, piece by piece, and I wasn't even in the room. Her lover tried to comfort her. He pulled her close, whispered things to her, told her everything was going to be okay. He thought that was enough. He thought she would believe him, but she didn't, because he couldn't stop this. He couldn't erase what had already been done. He couldn't take away the reality that someone had found her, that someone was watching, that someone was coming for her. She didn't sleep. I knew she wouldn't. I knew she would spend the night staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding, her ears straining for any sound that might confirm her worst fears. And I knew that the silence would only make it worse. Because when there's nothing, when the world is still, when the shadows don't move and the walls don't creak, that's when you start to wonder if the danger is already inside. By morning, she was shaking. She barely touched the coffee he made for her, barely responded when he kissed her forehead and told her to rest. "I have to go to work," he murmured, hesitating at the door, watching her like he was afraid to leave. "I can stay if you need me to." She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Go." She didn't want to be alone, but she didn't want him there either. He couldn't help her. No one could. The door shut behind him, and then she was alone. She didn't move at first, just sat there, staring at her phone, at the messages she refused to open, at the words that had already etched themselves into her mind. You can't run forever. Her breath was unsteady. Her hands were unsteady. Everything about her was unsteady. She needed to do something, needed to fix this. She couldn't live like this. She couldn't keep waiting for something to happen. And then, finally, She made a decision. She called me. I answered on the third ring. "Hey, Liv," I said, my voice light, warm, familiar. "Everything okay?" Silence. Then, her voice, small and shaking. "Michael, I need to ask you something." I frowned, keeping my tone soft, concerned. "Of course. What's wrong?" A sharp inhale. A hesitation. Then, "Do you know anything about this?" I let the silence stretch, just long enough to make her doubt herself, just long enough for her pulse to pick up, for her fingers to tighten around the phone, for her mind to start spinning again. "Know about what?" I finally asked, perfectly measured, perfectly calm. She swallowed. Nothing. "Never mind." "No, Liv. Tell me." Her breath stuttered. "It's just, I keep getting these messages. And last night, my door." She cut herself off, her voice breaking. "I don't know. I don't know what's happening to me." I exhaled slowly, letting my voice drop into something softer, something careful. "Liv, are you okay?" A choked sound. A quiet sob. "No," she whispered. "I don't think I am." I smiled. She was slipping. I could feel it. She was doubting herself, doubting her sanity, doubting everything. And that was the final step. That was when the fear stopped being external and started living inside her. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was her reality. "Come home," I said gently. Her breath caught. "I don't want you to be alone," I continued, voice full of concern, full of warmth. "You're scaring yourself. Just come home, Liv. Please." She hesitated. I could hear it. Could hear the way her mind was scrambling for an answer, a way out, a solution. But there wasn't one. There was only me. "Oh, okay," she finally whispered. And just like that, she walked back into the trap.